We're going to talk about a medical dilemma, its cause perhaps, and treatment next on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
Someday, your life will flash before your eyes. Make it worth watching. Introducing the 2013 Lexus LS, an entirely new pursuit.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.
Thank you. I'm Henry Baskin, your host for this edition of Due Process. Today we're going to talk about this medical dilemma that people are involved in. We have two spokespersons who are going to talk about what we call autism and its spectrum. We have Lisa Price, who is an advocate, and you're in the field, fully informed, and it's been how many years?
Our son was diagnosed in 2002.
2002.
So Jack's Place has been in inception since 2003.
We're going to talk about that. And Doug Berry, you've been involved for how long?
I'm a founding board member. When they were forming their charity, I was contacted at the agency that I worked at, and I've been involved ever since it's been in existence.
Okay, we have a place called Jack's Place, which is a center for autistic children, but we've got to know more about the syndrome, the autistic syndrome, or whatever you want to call it. So, Lisa, how did you determine that you were going to be involved in autism and its treatment and perhaps a cause?
The struggle, we brought our son home from the hospital recognizing that there were some anomalies that were occurring. He didn't present like other children. Jackson wasn't diagnosed till he was almost 4. A myriad of physicians who couldn't really tell us what was going on.
Really?
We've been very blessed with many friends, so we were able to make some phone calls, get into the appropriate physicians, and get a diagnosis.
Did you know anything about autism before the birth of your son?
Actually, I did. My best friend in high school's oldest sister had a daughter with autism, which was unheard of then. So this would have been 1971.
Well, that's, wait a minute, Doug, going back to 71, those many years ago, I never heard the word autism. We had kids who were, had social problems and problems articulating and all kinds of quirky things, but we didn't call it autism. We called it whatever you wanted to say, and try to treat it with a drug called Ritalin or something.
In the 70s especially, there was still a belief that it was caused by mothers who didn't love their sons and daughters enough. It was actually blamed on the mother's lack of care, which of course didn't exist. There wasn't.
You mean the medical people thought that was how?
Well, it was caused by the parents.
Okay.
It was called the refrigerator mother syndrome.
That's correct. And wonderful, wonderful mothers were literally accused by their physicians of not loving their child enough.
What were some of the symptoms? For example, your son. How did you feel?
Repetitive behaviors. Lack of focus. You'd speak to him, he didn't respond. He never slept. We didn't sleep the first 5 years of his life until we did have a diagnosis. And I had a doctor finally say to me, "You need your glasses to see? We got to give this child something to sleep so that his body and his mind can rest and catch up." Made a big difference.
Doug, what about you?
We had 6 years of sleep deprivation.
Did you know what it was?
No, we went to a doctor, a pediatrician, at about 21 months of age, when our son Patrick was 21 months of age. And he was staring at my son, and my son was playing with things, but in an unusual way. This is very common with autism. First of all, he wasn't looking people in the eye, he was just sort of looking around. And secondly, whenever he handed my son his stethoscope, and instead of putting a stethoscope on and trying to play with it or touch it or figure it out, he just wiggled it.
Really?
It was a prop. And those behaviors, and then there was tiptoe walking, where my son was walking on his tiptoes, and a little hand flapping, and after 20 minutes he said, I think there are signs of autism here, and it just hit us like a ton of bricks.
Well, can you define autism for me? Can you define it, Lisa? I mean,
It's a neurological disorder with the inability to interact specifically with their peers. Social behaviors are impossible for our kids. They can't read facial cues.
well, here's interesting. When you were in high school or grade school, did you know any children who were in your class who had these
Looking
symptoms?
back now, absolutely.
You did?
Absolutely no.
Okay, what about you, Doug? Did you know, when you were going to school, did you have friends and kids in your class that were exhibiting these signs?
None whatsoever. When Patrick, my son, was born, our son was born 20 years ago, the rate of autism was 1.
Well, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand what's happened in the last 20 or 30 years to be statistically a number that says, well, 1 in 8 boys born are going to have some indicia of autism. What's happened here?
I don't think anybody really knows.
No.
There have been all sorts of theories, because in a very short period of time it went from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 88. And it's more common, it's 4 times more common in boys than it is in
Right, I
girls.
hear more often boys than girls.
Much more. Yeah.
Well, and I'd want to look at the model as well. Since we didn't have the appropriate criteria to gauge these children, the number may have been higher.
It may have been.
I would say that when I was in high school, any child with an anomaly was all lumped in, so they were all in quote-unquote a special education
Well,
room.
right, we had special ed.
Correct.
And we had these kids going to special ed, but not to the extent that we see it now.
No. Well, because we have our tools are much better, and how we're able
Diagnostic
to diagnose.
tools?
Correct.
Okay, I understand that, but there are people who are on national TV saying things such as, it's the vaccine that is given to a child that causes it. It's the food. It's all these things. But what has changed? Nothing's changed in the last 100 years with respect to this. And yet, is it that we notice it more? Did we ignore it before? I don't think so.
There's definitely an anomaly now, and it's bonded to our genes. It's quite frustrating to us in the autism community as we revisit theories that we've been dealing with for the last 30 years, which are vaccines and diet.
Well,
We have a neurological disorder. We have a wiring issue that exists. And to have parents believe, which is a sad scenario, that by feeding their children different food,
right.
that's going to correct this anomaly.
Well, go ahead, Doug.
Oddly enough, there's another aspect to this. When your son or daughter is diagnosed with autism, you process it like a death in the family. First, there's a denial stage that there's a problem. Then there's I'm going to single-handedly fix it myself. I'm going to get on the internet. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do the other thing. There's in some people there's a blaming God. Why did you do this to me? Ultimately, there's just an acceptance that life has dealt you a curve. And you've got to be ready for it, and you've got to do the best you can, and you've got to be the best person and the best mother or father you can, and just go.
Okay, that's the treatment. We're going to talk after we take a break. Not right now, but we're going to talk later about Jack's place, your place. But I want to know if there are any doctors who have said, look, I'm going to specialize in this area. I'm going to figure out why, mostly in boys, very few girls, and why we seem to have more of it now? Have we broadened the spectrum from Asperger's to something else, or is there something going on? Is it about global warming? Is it about things as foolish as that? Is it about nuclear capabilities and nuclear fission and nuclear energy? Is it about any of those things? Because I'm sure you've stood there and said, there has to be a reason. There has to be a reason.
Science tells us that we're not necessarily closer. The best scientists in the country working out of California will tell us it's a gene anomaly between 5 and 20 genes. That's what we're looking at now.
I guess my question is, why now? Why in the last 10 years or 20 years have we noticed this and tried to figure out the cause for it, and when it was ignored before?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, and I don't think anyone has the answer to it, and in part that's because it may be there are so many variations. It's a spectrum disorder, which is to say it comes in many flavors.
Right.
There are some autistic people who are just socially awkward. And they function well in society. They're very good computer programmers because everything is the same every time you touch the key. They're excellent computer programmers. And then there are very severe forms of it where there's no speech, there's violent behavior, it acts out all the time. So autism could be several combinations of several things.
See, we used to think about mainstreaming these children, saying, look, don't put them in a special class. Let's mainstream them so they can learn from others who are, quote, normal, unquote. Do you agree with that principle?
It all depends on the severity. And this is my belief. Mm-hmm. It all depends on the severity of the autism. My son goes to a school in Garden City that has 350 autistic students, and they're all autistic, and they're all aspects of the spectrum.
And they all present differently.
They all present differently. And when they walk into that school, the teacher knows exactly what they are looking at. They know exactly what triggers the child's behavior, reactions to things. They know what they're looking at, and that's an advantage. Now, sometimes, if it's a mild autism, students can be mainstreamed very successfully. But at the same time, at the school my son goes to, sometimes they go mainstream and then they come back. And when you ask why, the mother says, well, my son or daughter is mildly autistic, so they were aware when other people were making fun of them.
We're going to have to take a break right now, and when we come back, talk about the future for these children.
Legal referrals and more information on this and other related topics are available on our website at www.dueprocess.tv. There you'll find information on today's program, helpful hints to legal issues, support materials, and lawyer referrals. You can also stream previous episodes of Due Process.
We're back in Due Process talking to our guest about autism. It's a broad spectrum affecting millions of children, mostly boys, in our society. You people have put together a place called Jack's Place, named after your son. Is that correct, Lisa?
Correct.
And what is Jack's Place designed to do?
We support families in the community through the location of physicians, services, transitions. Jack's Place is currently working on a life skills center that will work with kids, I like to say womb to tomb, from diagnosis to they don't need us anymore. And that will support long-term living.
Okay, when you say they won't need you anymore, you're teaching coping skills to the parents?
Yes, not to parents. Well, that's a part of the piece. But what we're teaching is independence and how to support themselves so that they can function on their own or an environment similar to being on their own.
As they become adults?
Correct. And we want to start as early as the age of 11. The skills need to be instilled repeatedly over and over and over again.
Well, is it possible to have more than one child who's autistic?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We deal with families who have children who vary on the spectrum. That's the interesting thing about the diagnosis. You may have a set of twins who are both diagnosed but do not present the same.
Okay.
So yes, that's common. I hate to say that.
But no one has been able to say it's the vaccine, it's the food.
No.
You don't believe in that, do you?
At one time, I thought it was the vaccine, but frankly, they took the suspicious
Thimerosal.
the thimerosal out of
Right.
the mercury preservative.
Okay.
Took it out, and the
it-
rates continue to go up. So it wasn't that.
It's not the food, it's not about breastfeeding, it's not about environment.
The latest theory that I heard was when fathers are over the age of, have you heard this? Over the age of 35, there's a higher incidence. The older the father is, the higher.
Really?
There's a higher incidence.
But that's not
But I have
proven
no
out.
idea whether that's significant or.
So all the money that's being raised to support Jack's Place and to support research into this spectrum, have they made any progress? And I know
Yes,
progress.
we're narrowing that. As with any medical anomaly,
Right.
what we're going to see, and it's going to be controversial, will be a test. You're going to be able to test the child in the womb to see if, in fact, they're going to be a child born on the spectrum.
Okay, so what good will that do?
Well, and that's that
next
question.
question.
Well, that's a big social issue. Tell me, is this specific to the United States?
No.
No, it hit Europe, it's hit Asia, it hit North America, and it's across all racial, social, ethnic boundaries. Everybody got hit at the same time.
Here's my issue. What happens when you're gone, and you have this child, man, now adult, who still has the symptoms, still presents with the same symptoms that he had, whether it be Asperger's or anything else? What's going to happen to those kids, those adults?
Well, that is the tough one, because with 1 in 88 births being on the spectrum,
Right.
4 times more common in boys, there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of autistic births, and they're all going to be adults. And right now the system is set up so that you either live with your parents until you die, and then you're thrown into the social services, or you are fortunate enough to land in an organization that'll buy a house in a community. You'll live with 3 other autistic individuals with care. But that was a system set up when there was only 1 in 10,000.
Well, I was going to say, there are hundreds of thousands of these people walking around
Yep.
in this country who are in their 30s and 40s, and perhaps are even street people.
Yeah, right.
There are no agencies, aside from places like Jack's, but there are no agencies to deal with these adults. And I don't hear it in court. I don't hear someone say, well, here's my defense. This is an autistic person, and that's why the rape occurred, or whatever it is. I don't know what we intend or plan to do with the issue. For example, the issue I have is that when people get divorced, the father typically pays support for the child and pays medical until the child is 18. After that, there is no help. There is no legislation that says, wait a minute, if your child is autistic and requires special care and has special needs, then that should be extended, because that's your son, and your son should be supported by you for as long as you live. I mean, that's what I believe, and I don't know what you've done with the Michigan legislature or any other legislative actions.
We've not touched that issue. And I believe, and I'd like to just back up and say, the explosion has forced the communities to look at what is the future. And that's the push, is that how is the federal government and state government and local government going to support these adults?
Well, how are they going to coordinate? How is there going to be a cost-effective way to get the city, the county, the state, the federal government to come together and say, oh, right, this is a looming problem. It's getting closer every day. And nobody wants to institutionalize. Everybody wants to find a warm, caring, understanding place where autistic people come together, get the care that they need, and don't have to live with their parents until their parents die.
And we look to you, Henry, to push for and work toward legislation. There is no legal precedent in a courtroom that says that a judge needs to in a divorce settlement, pay for the child for the life of their life expectancy.
Right. They're restricted by the law.
Correct.
And they need some legislation. They need a law that says, we will do this. As a matter of fact, the Lieutenant Governor of Michigan, I think, he has a child who's autistic to some, a daughter, is it, to some degree. And you would think that there'd be a movement, instead of talking about some of the things they talk about in Lansing, not criticizing, this is not political, but they should take a look at these kids, because some of these kids have caused such destruction on their way to become adults. It's amazing. You have stories that you could tell? Yeah.
Well, first I'd like to talk about, in the community, the divorce rate in families with a child, with one child on the spectrum, is in the 80 percentile. So we deal with mothers and sometimes fathers. We have mothers who've left the family.
You know, that compares, that number you just cited compares to the death of a child, or a child born with another illness. That family doesn't seem to stay together. There usually is a divorce and a denial aspect to it.
Yes. And that's prevalent in our community. So we deal with a lot of moms who are raising sometimes not one child on the spectrum, but multiples on the spectrum, who are trying to navigate the social service system.
So if we're going to put a screen up to let people know how to reach Jack's Place, but when they do call, what happens? Is there an intake process?
Yes, and they typically speak to me, and I help them work through the process. The biggest piece that we have learned in our almost 10 years of doing this is they need to be heard.
Okay.
They need to be heard.
And are there people medical people who specialize in autism and treatment?
No, they do, but when we say treatment, the only recognized therapy is ABA, which is Applied Behavioral Analysis.
Okay.
I'm overwhelmed by families who are looking for funding to do all of these alternative methods that we try to dissuade families from.
Right, but is there any medication? Is there any drug?
There's not one specific drug, it's a cocktail.
It's a cocktail.
It's a cocktail.
Are we dealing with something that we thought we had known about called AIDS years ago? I mean, this seems to be exponentially growing to the point where it's almost like the awareness is there. You people are making people aware that there has to be an initiative to treat these kids and or find out the cause for it or prevent it, as they did with AIDS. I mean, I sort of wonder why we have millions and millions and billions of dollars spent on AIDS, but not about these kids who are born. 1 out of 800 boys are showing some signs of it. And I wonder what's happened to the national consciousness. What's happened to it?
Well, it's got lots of things to worry about, AIDS being one of them. But what people don't realize, and what you're bringing up, is that if you take a look at terrible things like AIDS, and you take a look at terrible things like breast cancer, and you look at terrible things like muscular dystrophy, autism is more common than all three of them combined.
Well, see that? And the reason I mentioned is you use the word cocktail. And that's what they eventually used in the treatment of AIDS.
Correct.
A cocktail. Is there such a thing, a cocktail of drugs that can control some of this behavior?
It mitigates or modifies. It doesn't take it away. There isn't a pill that's going to rewire them.
So we're sitting here knowing this is a national epidemic. It's all over the world and not indigenous to the United States, and saying, well, there's really nothing we can do except understand, treat, and make plans for the future of this child, because no one's getting better. I mean, you find that to be true.
Correct. There's modification, but there's no cure.
And that's why Jack's Place doesn't emphasize this particular treatment over another treatment.
Okay.
What we do is we just cut to the chase. You're a family who's faced with autism. You have challenges other people don't have. It affects you day to day to day. 5 years of sleep deprivation, 6 years of sleep deprivation, 80% divorce rate. There are human issues right here in Metro Detroit, and that's what Jack's Place is dedicated.
We just have a few seconds left. Is there anything you want to say before we close it out?
I think the epidemic, I think that's an interesting topic to talk about, this explosion in the community, and to understand that it's not going anywhere. We don't see the numbers going down, we see the numbers going up. And we'd like the community to be well aware of us and what we do.
Well, I have to tell you, before we're out of town completely, I want to thank you for being here and letting people become more and more aware of the issue. Now, how we attack it and what we do, the best thing I hear from you now is the treatment, being able to put these people in a better place for their future, and therefore putting all of us in a better place, I would imagine.
Yes.
But thank you so much for being here, and keep up the good work, because it is tough fighting something and without direction, and no one is telling you that here's a magic pill, here's chemotherapy, here's radiation and things. It's not like that. This has happened almost like Chernobyl. I mean, where suddenly we became aware of this. It crosses all boundaries, all racial, ethnic.
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
Someday, your life will flash before your eyes. Make it worth watching. Introducing the 2013 Lexus LS, an entirely new pursuit.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.